GaySA Radio. GaySA Radio, where you are family.
This is Livia from GaySA Radio, and I'm speaking to Kinny. Thank you so much for your time, Kinny. How are you doing?
Hi, Livia. I'm very well, thank you. And hello to all your listeners and viewers.
Thanks. So we're in our third interview, and we're going to talk about donor gametes. And First things first, it sounds the weirdest name I've ever heard, but what is a gamete?
A gamete is a male or female sex cell. So that would be sperm or egg.
Oh, that's interesting. Didn't know you called
it. So combined, the collective noun for them is gamete or gametes.
That's interesting. And if you become a donor, is it anonymous?
So in South Africa, the law stipulates that egg and sperm donation are anonymous. We are governed by the National Health Act, and it is anonymous in South Africa. There are very few circumstances where a donor can be known to the recipient, like if a recipient has a friend or relative that would like to donate their eggs or sperm to them, the donor then becomes known. But that has it's a more complicated process that involves high court orders, and they would need to sign a known donor agreement and go for further psychological counseling for them to understand the implications of donating to someone that you know. So it is more complicated in that respect. It takes longer, and it is more expensive because of the legalities and the screening requirements around that. So it is possible for egg and sperm donation to be known in South Africa. However, the majority, I would say 99% of donations are anonymous, as stipulated by the National Health Act. South Africa's laws are really among the best in the world because of our relatively new constitution or democracy. We were able to take different aspects of egg and sperm donation laws from around the world and carve them into what most people think works best for the recipient and the donor.
Right. Well, you've answered my third question, but that's fine. Okay, so now I want to now start a family and I need to get a donor. Where do I get a donor? How does the process work? How does the whole thing get about getting a donor or so forth? So if you can just
if you or your partner are thinking of starting or completing your family, and you already know that you will need an egg or a sperm donor, you would contact us. Chances are you are already in contact with our clinic, or you've identified a doctor that you'd like to work with. So the doctor would then put you in touch with me, or you can contact me directly. And we would show you the profiles of the donors who are available to donate to you, whether that's an egg donor or a sperm donor. So the process would be you looking at the various profiles. People have different things that they are looking for in a donor. Some people would like to match themselves to a donor that has similar phenotype to them. So things like eye color, hair color, and that sort of thing, and height and weight and body frame are important to some people. Some people are interested in the donor's interests and educational background, and things that they have a natural tendency towards. You know, like if a donor loves numbers and science and physics, or if a donor is more creative and arty and that sort of thing. Most people try to match themselves to a donor who is similar to them, you know, someone who will fit into the family, so to speak. And that goes with physical attributes as well as personality, interests, and quirks, and that kind of thing. So you would make your donor choice based on some of those attributes. And once you've chosen a donor, you would let us know. And depending on whether it's an egg donor or a sperm donor, we would then get the process started, because the sperm is frozen in advance of the donors being made available to you. So by the time you're looking at a donor's profile, their sperm has already been frozen and it's available for immediate use. Whereas in the case of an egg donor, the donor would need to, it's a fresh cycle, so to speak. So the donor would need to make herself available to come in for the donation process and the scans and the screening and appointments and ultimately the egg retrieval in the month that we're looking at having treatment. And for the egg donor, you would generally be choosing your egg donor between 6 weeks to really up to 12 weeks before you would like to have your treatment.
What are the costs if you want to use a donor gamete?
So the clinic costs, if you're having an egg donation cycle, the clinic costs are around 80 to 90,000. Then there's an agency fee of 18,000 Rand for South African recipients. And if you are using a sperm donor, the cost of the sperm is 5,000 Rand, including that. But the actual cost of your treatment depends on which treatment you're having. If you are doing artificial insemination, the costs are different. And then, of course, if you're having IVF with your own eggs, or if you are doing egg donation treatment, the costs vary. But the cost of the actual sperm is 5,000 Rand. And that cost would be added into whatever the clinic has quoted you for your treatment.
And what are the legalities around using donor gamete?
So as I said earlier, egg donation and sperm donation are anonymous in South Africa. We are governed by the National Health Act. We are also regulated and registered with an ethical body called SASREG, which oversees the ethics and processes of egg and sperm donation in South Africa. So the general requirements per the National Health Act are that the donations are anonymous, and the donor, no identifying information of the egg or sperm donor is released to the recipient. The donors should not be carriers of any major genetic disorder, you know, something like cystic fibrosis or thalassemia, you know, those sort of, or sickle cell, those sort of genetic disorders. And donors are also compensated for their time and effort. At the moment, the compensation is sitting at 7,000 Rand each time you donate as an egg donor, and sperm donors are generally compensated between 7,000 and 10,000 Rand, depending on the program they're in. The other legality is that donors must be screened psychologically, so they undergo a psychological assessment to deem that they are mentally and emotionally fit to donate. So that's something else that we do. But the biggest requirement is that the donor is anonymous.
Can a donor gamete be used in any treatment option?
Yes, an egg donor, with an egg donor, the only kind of treatment option you would be having is IVF, because the eggs are retrieved from the donor and then either frozen or fertilized in our laboratory with sperm. So the only option, the only thing you could do with those eggs or embryos, or rather embryos, once they've been fertilized with sperm, is have an embryo transfer, which is the culmination of an IVF cycle. So with egg donation, the only treatment option available is IVF. You could also, if you are a gay couple, be embarking on a surrogacy journey. So the embryos that are created from the egg donor, as well as your or your partner's sperm, or indeed a sperm donor's sperm, would be created and transferred into your surrogate in an embryo transfer. And that is also an IVF process. Then with sperm, there are different treatments. So you could have artificial insemination, which is a much simpler procedure that doesn't require any anesthetic. It's the sperm is injected into your cervix and uterus using a syringe. So it's a very quick and simple and procedure that has far lower costs. Then you could also use the donor sperm to have traditional IVF treatment. So those are the treatments that are available using donor gametes.
And home inseminations, is that legal?
Home inseminations.
Yes.
So you can't do home inseminations because according to the National Health Act, all artificial reproductive techniques should be administered by a competent person. The National Health specifies throughout the ART regulations that a competent person should do all procedures. And in this case, in the case of artificial insemination or any fertility treatment, a competent person would be a medical doctor. So, you know, you wouldn't be able to have a medical doctor do the procedure at home. So on that basis, at-home inseminations are not allowed, are not permitted by law. In the case where you are considering at-home insemination, we found that it just creates other loopholes. Like, whose sperm are you inseminating with? Is it a friend who has generously offered the use of their sperm? Or a female friend who is agreed to have you inseminate her with your sperm? It creates loopholes, legal loopholes. Who is the parent of the child? Is there an agreement in place? Has that agreement been ratified by attorneys on both sides? What are the expectations for the child that could be born from the insemination? So they are, apart from the fact that they are not permitted by law, we do also discourage them very much because of the gray area that it puts both individuals in. And in fact, there have been a number of cases, some in the media in the last year, where people did at-home inseminations and it just, you know, went really wrong, and are now sitting in court and you know, fighting it out in the media. So we discourage them. If somehow you are able to have your at-home insemination, I don't recommend it because of the blow up and that can happen afterwards.
So it's just safer for you to have, how can I say, these procedures and policies in place before embarking on starting a family. So it's a way of having, instead of having more headaches than what you having enjoyment of starting.
Exactly. And yeah, exactly. And we as the clinic, we have a lot of consent forms in place, consent forms that the egg donor and the sperm donor sign with the clinic, that they sign with the agency. that protect the egg and or sperm donor, and have them understand what they are doing. You know, they give up all their parental and rights and responsibilities, and it's all done in a fair and equitable way. The clinic is also protected and represented in those agreements. Then with the recipient of the gametes as well, we have consent forms in place. So they are also protected and assured that no one is going to come and claim their child or their baby down the road, or claim, you know, if a child born from a donation suddenly wins the lottery or becomes the prime minister of the UK, the donor is not going to, has no right or claim over their lottery winnings. So, you know, that's a silly example, but it makes the point that you are protected by following the procedures that are in place. And the costs that are involved in having treatment at a fertility clinic, whatever the treatment is, even if it's something as simple and not as cost not as expensive as IVF, you know, doing something like artificial insemination, the cost is worth the assurance that everything will be taken care of.
And the right way.
Yes.
And a healthy way, to be honest. Is
Yes.
there a way that a person can have a genetic link to your child by using an egg or sperm donor?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but
Is there a way that you still have a genetic link with your child if you use a sperm or egg from a donor?
Yes. So there's your child's genetics would obviously primarily come from the donor. However, there is a field of science called epigenetics that's been around, I think, since the 1940s or so. And with epigenetics, some of your genes, or rather some of the person who's carrying the child, whether it's the surrogate or the female partner carrying the child, some of those genes are passed on in utero. There hasn't been as much research into it as we would like, but the body of research is growing. And for instance, they found that some of the estrogen-based cancer gene mutations are only passed on in utero. So while you are pregnant with your baby, you pass on the expression or non-expression of that gene. So things like that. And I would encourage anyone who is interested in that or who's concerned whether or not their child will have any of their genetics to research epigenetics and fertility. It's a really fascinating body of science. And the other thing to keep in mind for a woman who is carrying a baby who's was conceived through donor gametes is that at the end of the day, it is your body and your blood essentially that feeds and grows and sustains that pregnancy. So there comes a point where do you begin and where does the fetus or the baby end? So you become very intertwined in every way that is meaningful with the baby that you're carrying. And I think the basic essence of epigenetics is that the environment that something is in, and in this case it would be a pregnancy, is what determines the outcome. I think that's the basic tenet of epigenetics. So whatever environment your pregnancy is sustained in is what will determine the outcome and what is expressed in the baby. So it's a case of nature versus nurture.
Right. And can I use a donor for multiple pregnancies? So if I want my children to be genetically linked, can they come from the same donor?
Yes, they can, if your donor is still available. So in the case of an egg donor, we have many recipients that come back for sibling children, and it's wonderful. You know, after a few years, they may wish to provide a genetic sibling for their son or daughter, and it's fantastic. And we see a lot of that. But you would only be able to do it if your egg donor is still available to donate. One of the legality that I didn't mention earlier is that a donor can only create 6 lives their donation. So only 6 children can be born from their donation. So if an egg donor has reached her live birth limit of 6, then unfortunately she won't be able to do a fresh donation for you. However, some recipients have leftover embryos from their first cycle or the first donation that they received from the donor. Like for instance, if a donor creates 15 eggs, there is an attrition process from the 15 eggs to the number that is fertilized and the number of embryos that are left over. So you could be left with, say, 5 embryos by the time in the 5 days after the egg retrieval and at your embryo transfer, you could have 5 embryos available. Generally, the doctor will transfer 2 embryos. The leftover 3 embryos, for instance, would be frozen for later use. Later use would be if, unfortunately, you don't fall pregnant the first time, you could come back to use the 3 remaining embryos to try again. Or if you are successful the first time, the 3 embryos would remain frozen for you, and you could come back a few years later whenever you wish to create a sibling from those embryos. And those embryos, they belong to you. So even if a donor has reached her live birth limit of 6, the embryos are yours to do what you wish with them. So you can use them for a sibling, down the line, 5-10 years down the line. So those are the circumstances under which you can use the same egg donor again for a genetic sibling. Then in the case of sperm, if the donor hasn't reached his live birth limit, and if there is enough, if we still have stock of his sperm, then you are most welcome to use him for a sibling donation.
Okay, so how long does a embryo, how long can they stay frozen for?
Gosh, indefinitely. I mean, I've heard of embryos that have been frozen for 15, 20 years. So we can't say forever, because IVF treatment hasn't been around forever. But with new technologies coming up, freezing technologies and protocols coming up, the lifespan of freezing embryos is always increasing. So bear in mind that if you are having IVF at the age of 40 or 45, you aren't going to come back for them in 30 or 40 years. So, you technically don't need them to be frozen for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
There isn't really a scenario where you would need your embryos to be frozen for 30 or 40 years. But the time span that we have had is great. We've had embryos frozen for more than 20 years.
Right, our final question. Can I use an egg or sperm donor if I'm using a surrogate?
So according to the National Health Act, the child born from surrogacy must have a genetic relation to one of the commissioning parents. Commissioning parents a commissioning parent is the couple who is, or the person who is embarking on the surrogacy journey, or the person who is going through the High Court approval process. So in the case of, say, 2 men who want to have a child through surrogacy, we would need to use the sperm of one of the partners or one of the couple. So and unfortunately, the law doesn't allow for you to do what is called a double donation. There was a case some years ago where someone petitioned the High Court to have that changed. I think that they were successful. So it has, if it was successful, it would have set a precedent. But the best thing to do would be to contact our attorney, Andrew Martin, to ask what could be done for you in the case where you want to use an egg and sperm donor for surrogacy.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We know that you are busy. So Kenny, thanks a lot, and I hope you have a wonderful day. This is Livia from GaySA Radio, and we're thanking Hart Fertility Clinic for all the information and news of how to start our own families and what we need to know in those little hidden corners that we don't know. Thank you so much.
Cheerio.